We now can look at the Ara Pacis, or the Altar of Peace. Because Augustus, of course, wanted to sell the Pax Romana, the best way for him to do that was to have a major monument, right, that celebrated the idea of peace. Now, I wanted to stress to you that if you look at all the Roman emperors, obviously we don't have time to look at all of them, but if you look at all of them, beginning with Augustus, they always have a signature monument, as I put it. They have something that celebrates either who they thought they were as emperors, or something, some conquest they'd had, or some achievement. The Roman forums are a place where you can go look at a lot of these monuments, or these pieces that commemorate, in a sense, who the emperors believe they were. So something that speaks to the propaganda of who the emperor is. So to me, Augustus begins this tradition with the Altar of Peace, and it kind of continues on with each emperor after him. We talked before about how, for Romans, their definition of a temple, or how big it should be, or what it should be dedicated to, was going to be a lot more loose than what a Greek would think was proper. So once again, I think a Greek would look at this temple and say, it's an altar to peace. Like, you can't have an altar to a concept. It's not how it works, right? You have an altar to a god. But the Romans were like, whatever, it's fine, it works, right? We want to basically advertise something. Get out of the way, Greeks. You're too humanistic for us. You're too serious, right? So it sort of continues the legacy, I think, of the Romans. They don't really care about how you do something. Does it work? Does it advertise what you want it to advertise? You'll notice it's not a very big building, but it is covered with all this different kinds of decoration. On the bottom, you have like growing vines, and then on the top portion, you have these carved scenes or vignettes, in a sense. Some of them are very generalized, like the one we're looking at here, and then other ones are a lot more historically specific, and we'll talk about those in a minute as well. This one shows us a woman in the center with two children, and then imagery that relates to the fruits of the air, the land, and the sea. Right? So if you look at the animals kind of placed throughout in the bottom portion, you'll notice a bird taking flight. You'll notice like a steer and like a little pig, I think it is, and then like a sea creature kind of rolling up on the right-hand side. Why show this imagery? Like, why do this? I believe it's meant to represent the Pax Romana again. It's meant to represent this idea that Augustus brings peace and prosperity to his people. So to me, it's a very generalized scene. So people talk about, like, well, who is the woman? Is she Gaia? Is she Mother Earth? Or Tellus, right, in the Roman tradition? Is she Pax, or peace? Is she a specific goddess? At the end of the day, we don't know. But I'd assume she's meant to represent the idea of fertility and fecundity and safety and security for the people of Rome. Who are the children? They could be just abstract concepts of like the Roman people. They could be Romulus and Remus. That would make a lot of sense. But the fact that they sit with this woman, she seems to take care of them and be, giving them safety and security. Again, I think that's what Augustus was trying to promise the people. And the idea that they have the fruits of the earth, the fruits of the sea, the fruits of the air, that they're fed, they're happy. So I think Augustus was really trying to represent this idea of, peace, prosperity, safety. The other carvings on it are even more interesting because they actually represent Augustus and his family. And you don't really see a lot of monuments that show the rulers almost in a sense of like in real time doing real things. Because the Ara Pacis was actually dedicated to Livia, Augustus's wife, on her birthday. And it's sort of like a birthday present, right? And what we're seeing in the carving is them coming to dedicate the temple. So I always compare it to almost like a red carpet. They're coming down the red carpet, right? They're the celebrities that everybody's seeing. And in the sense, we're seeing something carved on a monument that actually happened. It's almost like a photograph in that kind of way. A lot of imagery on monuments is usually pretty generalized. It's usually not meant to represent like a specific moment in time or a specific event. It's like the first image I showed you. It's more about a concept. So this is very, very unique sculpture, and that's showing Augustus, Livia, right, the family all at the same time. Augustus, of course, is in the front leading the pack. Livia is right behind him. You'll notice that Livia holds the hand of their son Tiberius. But do you see the two kids in the background? Those are the children she had in her first marriage. Now, why are all these kids present? I mentioned before that Livia is often credited by historians as legislating the social. And one of the things that Augustus seems to allow her to push is this idea of family, and that a good Roman has family, right? That they try to create a family, nurture a family, that more children are better. If you think about why you'd want to stress this idea of family making or having children, they are going to have a large army. So I think that basically what Livia was trying to create was a social reason. Get that idea in people's heads that fertility and children and propagating was the patriotic thing to do. But if you look at like why they'd want you to do that, well, you need to have new little soldiers as the other soldiers get killed off in battle. So you have to keep replenishing your stock in a sense. So I think underneath the surface message of, family is patriotic is, the practicality of keeping an army viable. So this is the beauty of legislating the social. I always say if someone's trying to legislate the social to you, you should really often check out what they're actually trying to get at. It's often not what you think you're seeing on the surface. It's something quite deeper than that. And again, it almost can be insidious sometimes in how it's wielded as a tactic. So Livia in her own right can be very interesting to study because she seems to wield a lot of power as the empress. That she's kind of whispering things in his ear and he's taking note of what she has to say. Many historians think this is why he wanted to marry her, that she was of a proud patrician line, but she also was a really smart woman, and kind of was behind the emperor, supporting him and giving him good ideas. Like he was strong in his own right, why not have a strong mate who could, equal him, right, as far as ideas and ideology and so forth. So that's why we think the children are here to sort of put forth this idea of family, fertility, peace, prosperity, in just kind of another framing or another format. Obviously, we're seeing the style here as something that is heavily influenced by what the Greeks invented, right? The naturalism of form. You can notice the contrapposto and the posing of bodies and such in some of the poses, the realism of, their stances and such. This is a real departure if you go back and look at the Palace of Persepolis from the Persian time period, where all of those figures are really stiff and static. And now we're seeing like a realistic rendering of how people would act in a crowd, how they'd move in a crowd. The Areopagus is a really interesting monument. Again, I think it blends, in a sense, things that are very objective and things that are very subjective together as far as the messaging is concerned. Now, the Julio-Claudian line had been a really prosperous one, and one that, in a sense, was very good at what it did. But I jokingly say that if you're using family line of descent to pick your leaders, that kind of sometimes can run into problems. You saw this with Egyptians, in their family lines or their dynasties. You also see it here with the Romans. This will lead later Roman emperors to actually move away from family line during the High Empire, for instance. So you'll notice that, sometimes good things have to come to an end because you have a bad leader who's descended through your line. So the great-great-grandson of Augustus was Nero. And he is looked at as the last of the Julio-Claudians because of his crazy ways. If you've never heard much about Nero, I mean, there's so much you could say about him. He was just really nutty. He was sadistic. He was pretty twisted and cruel. There's many stories you can tell about him. The fiddling while Rome burned is one of the most famous, of course. There's stories of him trying to kill his mother by drowning her. There's, of course, the stories of him using Christians as living torches in his gardens. And in one of the most gruesome stories I've heard is that he castrated a slave boy and dressed the slave boy up like a bride so he could marry him. This was a person who mentally probably was quite crazy. And many people question, if the patrician lines, there were only so many of them, were you getting into inbreeding, just like the Egyptians were? That led to, of course, craziness, mental instability, and there's something to be said by going down that avenue of argument. So Nero, in a sense, he draws the Julio-Claudian line to its end through his actions, his craziness, his exorbitant spending. One of the things Nero's famous for, of course, is the famous Golden House, which is just what it sounds like. It was a house made with golden walls. And again, many Romans viewed this as a slap in the face. They viewed it as something where their emperor didn't take their happiness very seriously, where Augustus knows his messaging is all peace, prosperity, providing. Nero's like, make me a golden house, and I will abuse my people in multiple ways. It's like, oh, yeah, that doesn't read as well. You're seeing here the ruins of the Golden House on the right, and then kind of a plan of it. I mean, they had like tumblers where flowers would fall on you and perfume sprayers and stuff. It was a very decadent place. So people were like, this was not a man who cared about the population, who cared about the people. And eventually he was cornered and given a choice. You can kill yourself or the people will kill you. And I talked to you a little bit before about, the honorable thing was to kill yourself, and he did, which drew his line to a close, which leads us to, well, what happens then? Well, unfortunately, the early empire people weren't ready yet to move on to a different form of government. So even though the Julio-Claudians had come to an end with Nero's suicide, the Senate basically says, okay, we need to pick another family line. So we'll pick the Flavian line and try to allow them to pick up the pieces, right, of what Nero leaves behind. We'll try to let them, get the empire back on track. And this was a big bill to fill, because I've often talked about with like politics. It doesn't matter who wronged you. If you're wronged, that sticks with you. I often think about the politics I'm involved with, where I'll talk to people and they'll be like, well, I didn't do that. And I'm like, well, it doesn't matter if you didn't do that. It was still done. And so you have to make up for that first, and then you can kind of go from there. People, they carry their wounds with them, that you have to make up for it. So the Flavians, in a sense, were in this bad position where they didn't do any of this crazy stuff, that Nero did, but they knew that there was like this open wound that the Romans had. So what do? They want to give the people something fun. So they give them the Flavian Amphitheater, or as you probably know it, the Colosseum. And what is the Colosseum? The Colosseum was built for entertainment. So, you want to make people happy, give them something that's fun. So it's built for entertainment. They're going to have chariot races here, naval battles, right? All kinds of stuff. And it was built on part of the Golden House grounds that were reclaimed after Nero's suicide, where he had a lake, a man-made lake. So if you notice, it kind of sits down in a bowl, and that circular area had been like where the lake was. This is why they actually could flood it for the naval battles. Pretty cool thing, right? The Colosseum was a nickname, because Flavian Amphitheater was what it was called, because originally there was a colossal statue of Nero, you'll notice that on the right on the reconstruction, that had stood nearby. So we think what people did was like, where are they building this? Oh, over by the Colossus. So over time, Colosseum kind of got merged together into the name Colosseum. And it is huge. It's a massive structure that follows the design of the Greek amphitheaters, but then takes it a little further. Greek amphitheaters actually were built into hillsides. What the Romans did was use concrete to create a circular freestanding structure that could be used for entertainment and games. So, again, you could have your chariot races, your naval battles, whatnot here. And it's a brilliant strategy. The Romans actually called it bread and circus. They believed if you kept your people fed, bread, and you kept them entertained, circus, you could pretty much do whatever you wanted to them. And I wish I could disagree, but I've been in politics a long time, and let me tell you, it's pretty true. If you keep people fed, you keep them, their bellies full, and you keep them entertained, you can kind of distract them with these two things and get away with a lot. Many people argue that Americans were very firmly set into bread and circus. That if you look at like reality TV, they've done a study where like more people would vote for American Idol back in American Idol's heyday than would vote for president. Like, this is truly disturbing, but it's just the truth of who we are as people. So many people argue like we're the new Rome, right? I don't know if I disagree with them, to be honest. There's a lot of books on this if you want to read more on the topic. It's not just me saying it, right? The bread and circus, this idea of distraction, will often allow the leaders to get on with the business they want to get on with without too many people paying attention. And for the Flavians, they had again had a lot of problems with trying to emerge out of Nero's shadow, and so if they could keep the people satisfied, that to them was working in their favor. So they create this, again, multiple layered concrete structure, very advanced for its time, multiple entrances and exits. People actually had little tickets. They'd have little potsherds or little pieces of pottery with like their section and their seat number and such. So it was, kind of what you would think of like going to a stadium today. And I always joke that this stadium's nicer than like Doak Campbell because look, they had a valerium or a sunscreen. So you didn't have to sit out in the heat. And again, during the games, they would raise up, scenery and animals and different kinds of things that were stored underneath the staging. They could flood it, all these kind of different things. So again, it's really this great example of the idea of like bread and circus, trying to come back from what Nero had inflicted on the people and try to, in a sense, reclaim, the positive, right? And reclaim people's trust in the imperial system. Now, did it work? Not so much. Which will bring us to our next conversation, which will be about the High Empire rulers and how they decide that family line is actually not the best way to go about picking emperors.